I have seen a lot of division in God's church over 40 years of ministry. I've seen ego-driven competition and behind-the-scenes manipulation and a lot of pettiness. But occasionally, I've seen remarkable reconciliation. Many years ago, in the parish I was serving as an associate, there were two very bright, well-organized, strong-willed women, and they were always at each other. One of them was the chair of the altar guild. We'll call her Jean. And in that particular church, to be chair of the altar guild was to hold high office. Unless your great-great-grandmama was a part of that altar guild, you would never get in. But the other woman was the chair of women's ministry. We'll call her Tammy. And to be chair of women's ministry meant to her that all the women in the whole church served under you, including the women of the altar guild. These women were always undermining each other. They were in constant competition and creating absolutely unnecessary battles in committee meetings. They had a long history of hurtful words, intentional slights that had led to deep wounds. And outside of the committee meetings, they had nothing to do with each other. They didn't even speak to each other. But as God would have it, their sons were best friends. Don't you love the way God will mess with us? The boys were the same age. They grew up playing basketball on the same team, making the same team trips, the same team practices. They had a lot of time together, and they grew close. They went in and out of one another's homes like family. And when they went to college, they became roommates. But in their sophomore year, they were a part of fraternity, and they were in the fraternity house on a Friday night for a big party where there was way too much drinking, and a fight broke out. One of their fraternity brothers had seen a guy from another fraternity come into the fraternity house, clearly trying to steal alcohol from the fraternity house. They got in this big brawl, and one of them pulled out a gun, and he shot it twice. And one of those bullets hit that young boy, who was the son of the woman who was head of the altar guild, Jean's son. An ambulance was called, but the boy died before they got him to the hospital. It was a horrible thing for his family and for our parish and for his best friend. The best friend who went home and closed himself up in his bedroom and wanted to talk to no one. He was devastated. The church was packed for the funeral, one of the largest funerals we'd ever had. A huge number of students. And the head of the women's ministry was there. She sat where she always sat, on the opposite side of the church from the head of the altar guild. But she was there. And she said the prayers, and she went through all the motions of a funeral. She couldn't help think to herself that that could just as easily have been my son. And at the end of the funeral, when the family was beginning to process out, she couldn't help but look up at the face of Jean. And Jean's face was pale, gaunt, empty of life. And the head of the women's ministry, Tammy, slid out by the side aisle and pushed through to get to the churchyard where the clergy were standing with the family as the casket was being placed in the hearse. And the head of the women of the church, Tammy, pushed past me and made her way immediately to the head of the altar guild and threw her arms around her. And those two women, with heads on one another's shoulders, cried at length. And I couldn't help but think, what a sad thing that it took the death of a child for these two women to get beyond all that petty competition. I do want to say that I could have told just The same kind of story about two men. It's not about gender, it's about human nature. Reconciliation comes from a Latin word that means to restore, to repair. Have you ever experienced reconciliation? I would say that if you have been married more than a day and you're still married, you have experienced reconciliation, right? Because we hurt each other all the time. We step on one another's feet. We say things we ought not be saying in anger and frustration. And we have to be reconciled. And sometimes that's a daily thing. I think that the longer you're married, the better you are at reconciliation, learning to say, I'm sorry, wanting to maintain unity. I'm at the place in my life when I feel like an argument's coming on, I think to myself, okay, is it worth it? Is it worth it? Is it worth ruining the weekend? No, it's not worth it. Because most of the time, it's going to be a bunch of superficial stuff that really doesn't matter. Like who's in charge of the altar guild and who's in charge of women's ministry. But sometimes, the brokenness that happens is a big deal. Not superficial at all. A disrespect between people. An infidelity. A selfishness that smothers love. And then reconciliation becomes a much more complicated thing. Then it takes something bigger than just words. Then it takes more than what caused the break. Something more weighty, something more costly and meaningful to open the door to reconciliation. Something like the death of a boy. Reconciliation should matter deeply to Christian people because it is the very heart of the gospel. The sacrificial love of God that we see in the cross of Christ is all about God seeking to reconcile the world to himself, doing a costly, sacrificial thing in order to jolt us to life and to push open the door to reconciliation. And why do we need to be reconciled? Well, because there's been a significant break in the relationship. Not a superficial thing, but a life-destroying thing. And I'm not just talking about Adam and Eve. I'm talking about all of us who from Adam and Eve forward continue to break the relationship that God seeks by living lives contrary to the character and purpose of God. Even when we stand in church and say, we believe in one God, the Father, the Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, we go out and our lives betray our confession as we continue to hate certain others, as we see ourselves as better than other people, as we refuse to forgive, as we live in great comfort, unwilling to lift a finger for those who are poor. We build up these walls through the actions of our lives. We just keep building up these walls that keep us from God and keep God from us. And God keeps trying to tear those things down, and we just keep building them right back up. That was St. Paul's experience in Corinth, our epistle lesson for today. You remember that church? Corinth, important church in the New Testament. Corinth was a really busy central trade port. It was on the sea. All kinds of sailors and tradesmen came in and out of there. People poured into Corinth for all kinds of reasons. They had the Isthmian Games. Okay, not as big as the Olympics, but in that time, they were huge. They were pan-Hellenic games held every 2 years in Corinth. People always pouring in there either to get ready for the games or to compete in the games. People also went there because they had this spa, a healing spa, dedicated to the Greek god Asclepius, the god of healing. And some people would go there for some weeks, hoping to receive healing, some for months. People went there because they had 5 huge temples dedicated to various gods, to Apollos and Poseidon and Aphrodite and Athena and Hermes. It was a kind of sin city, all right? That was Corinth. For those of you who remember New York City back in the 70s, I think that's kind of the picture of what it was. I mean, it was seedy. Times Square in the 70s was just nasty and dangerous. And that's this kind of place. But Paul, you have to love this about Paul. He was the kind of missionary who went straight into the mouth of the lion. You know, he didn't care. He's called by God. Out he goes. And he has this idea that if he could establish a solid community, even if it's a little community and it's solidly established in the person of Christ, that it would become an important beacon of light in that very dark and troubled city. But if you've read the book of Acts, you know that it didn't happen that way, and that Paul, for the rest of his life, struggled with that parish because they were always at each other. Always these ridiculous divisions, you know, and Paul would go over here and try to deal with this division, and then he'd go over there and try to deal with that division. It's kind of like the wildfires that we've seen out in California. You know, the firemen rush over here to put it out, and another one starts over there. And it was like that for Paul. There was the Jewish-Gentile division. There was the rich-poor division. Divisions about morality in the life of Christ. Divisions about whether or not you could eat food offered to the idols. Divisions over who was baptized by whom, and whether one person's baptism conferred more status and more power than another's. I mean, just any little doggone thing they could think of to be contrary. And Paul got so tired and frustrated with these people. And at one point, I mean, he chastises pretty hard. At one point, it's sort of like those daddies of old days who would say, "Do you want me to pull my belt off?" I mean, it was kind of like that. He had had enough of these people. He said, "You know, you're like babies. I thought you had some maturity, some depth. You're babes in the faith. You're so superficial in your commitments. You're so blind to the truth of the gospel." He had really hoped that this group of Christians would be this wonderful light in that darkness. But they don't have the maturity. So caught up in their own egos, their own needs for power and importance, that they stumble around from one division to another, making God's church just like any other human organization. Why would anybody be drawn to that, right? It reflects no miraculous power of God. Are you kidding me? Those people are just like everybody else. Look at them over there. So Paul preaches this little sermon telling them, hey, do you not understand that because of what God has done in Christ, offered this wonderful love, this grace, this mercy, those who accept that are transformed. We become different people. We're made new. We're given a different perspective, a different purpose, a different way of seeing life. We don't see with the eyes of the world anymore. We see with these new eyes. So we're not looking at who dresses how, who lives in what house, who has what educational degree, because we're not in competition with each other. We're not in that old life like the rest of the world. Paul says we see with the eyes of Christ, if we're willing, so that there is no division between us. Whatever hurt we've experienced from one another, whatever slight, whatever jealousy, whatever annoyance, let it go. It means nothing in the greater reality of what God has done. So why is this issue so important to Paul? I mean, he preaches it hard and more than a few times. Well, because it is the heart of the gospel. If you're not getting this, he's saying, if you're not getting this, you're not getting any of it. And then for the gospel lesson, we have that powerful prodigal son story from Luke. The father in the story, of course, represents God. And the willful son, the one who throws away the father's gift and ends up in a horrible place with his life, represents us, humanity. The remarkable thing about the story that Jesus tells is that the Father is so filled with love and mercy and grace, even with this very undisciplined, sinful son. This Father doesn't wait for the son to get down on his knees and say, "I'm sorry. The Father is so filled with love for that Son that as soon as he sees that heart turn in any way toward him, just the beginning, he runs to the Son, embraces him with love, restoring him to the family. Now, if we believe that that's what God the Father is like, that he has that kind of love, that kind of mercy, that kind of grace, that he knows us that well, and that he waits for us to even show any intimation of returning, that he comes running to us. If God has done in Christ the thing that Paul says, reconciling or seeking to reconcile the whole world to himself, then how can we, his people, not reflect that reconciling spirit in our own lives? Who is going to believe the gospel that we profess if it isn't visible in the lives of those who profess it? How can we not be reconciled to each other? How can we not daily seek reconciliation with all those people in our lives with whom we have broken relationships? Family members who are difficult, we all have them. Oh my gosh, we all have them. Some had lots of them, you know. Friendships that have been damaged, broken. Reconciliation with bosses who have mistreated us. Reconciliation out in the larger world with people who are different from us by race, creed, color. Doesn't matter. Reconciliation with people with whom we disagree politically. Paul says God has reconciled us to himself through Christ and has given us, listen to this, has given us the ministry of reconciliation. Has given to us, those who've been reconciled, the ministry of reconciliation, entrusting to us the message of reconciliation to other people so that we might be ambassadors for Christ out in the world. That before we even speak, before we even tell the story, they see Christ living in us. Because we act differently than the rest of the world around us. We have more compassion, more love, more forgiveness, more generosity of spirit. Doesn't matter who they are, what they've done. That was the nature of Christ, right? Supposedly that nature is being communicated to us by his Spirit through baptism, through the Holy Communion. Paul is saying not only should we be spreading the good news of God's reconciling purposes, but that we should be examples of it. Based on my experience, I would say that there are a million things that can cause division, but only one thing that prevents reconciliation: our egos. A lack of humility, an unwillingness to let go of hurt and anger and forgiveness and unforgiveness. And you might be sitting there thinking, well, you know what, Eric? You don't know this person that I deal with. But I have tried and tried and tried with that person, and they ain't willing to receive it. I'm doing my part, buddy. And I'd quote Romans. Paul says, if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live in peace with everyone. I mean, he recognizes there's tough personalities out there, right? But as far as it depends on you, you make the effort. You be the one, which doesn't mean you make a one-time try and they don't respond and you say, well, the heck with him. You see that, Lord? I tried. I'm done. He's yours. Tough noogies. No. It means that we remain always in a reconciling spirit, always willing, even when the other person is not. And how do we do that? Well, Paul seems to think that if we could really, in our hearts and our souls and our minds, really accept the gift of love in the cross of Christ, if we could really get our minds around how undeserving we are, all of us, of that gift, and how costly that gift was for God, then surely it would touch our hearts so deeply, transform us so significantly, that reconciliation would be easy, no matter who the people are or what they've done. Because when we see what God has done for us, how can we not do it for others? In the story I began with, the story about the two headstrong women Reconciliation did not even become a consideration for them until a son was lost. Does it take that kind of tragedy to break into our hardened hearts? Then surely the sacrifice of Christ upon the cross should be enough.